Okay, it's a little special edition lecture on DBQ writing in case y'all want to look at it before you do the thing. Or if you want to look at it before you write the DBQ, that's going to be homework for this week for Monday, Tuesday. Okay, so this is all, I've gone over this ad nauseum, really. But I would, as the meme suggests, I would advise you to follow these steps in writing your DBQ because it'll be a good DBQ. And you're familiar with these kind of order of operations. Read the prompt, you read, historicize, look at the prompt, look for clues, right? What is it asking? Really read the prompt. Like, what is it asking? What is it allowing you to do? What is it kind of saying you can't do? Is it giving you any limits or any kind of possibilities to make a broader argument? What do the years mean? Think about the dates. What do they represent? What's happening in that time period? So with the example that we were doing this week, the progressive DBQ gives you the years 1880 to 1920, right? So that's a pretty important time period, right? You have the Spanish-American War in there. You have the um, uh, World War One. That's a period of new immigration. So think about what the dates mean, if you can, right? And you can look at the documents and see if you can get any clues, right? What years are the dates, or what dates are the things published? Generally, if it's giving you like the one we were working with this week, 1880 to 1920, those are just random, right? That's a periodization, right? But if it's something like, a 1763, something probably went down that year. And you can look at the documents to see if you can get a clue as to what. Then you read the documents carefully one time through, plug in outside information, and then trying to go like, okay, what's the deal with this? Like, what what's the theme of this document? And see if you can start making, once you get to 2, 3, 4 documents you've read, you should start to see patterns, right, that will correspond to the groups that you create, which corresponds obviously to the paragraphs you write. Then you kind of put the documents in order. Right, topic. Then you're writing topic sentences. Write 1, 2, 3 for your 3-body paragraphs, and then you go up to the 2-on-1, and you're writing 2-on-1 thesis context. Already got the first topic sentence written, got all the documents in order, and you just kind of breeze through it, right? So let's go in more detail here. 1, read the prompt. So this is not the prompt that we worked with this week, but you've seen this DBQ before, and it's one of the ones, if you want to do another practice DBQ, you can do this one. Evaluate the extent of change in ideas about American independence from 1763 to 1783. So I know that this is basically this is the Treaty of Paris to the Treaty of Paris. It's the end of the French and Indian War to the end of the American Revolutionary War, right, is the time period here. Proclamation line is also 1763. Obviously, all the revolutionary stuff is in there. So I'm kind of getting a sense of, right, what are the years? Okay, I kind of know what the story is here. And then I look carefully, right, the extent of change. And you got to, when you see that extent to which, or extent of change, it's not going to be like lots. This is the kiss of death. This is the kind of dummy thesis where this is the prompt. Evaluate the extent of change in ideas about American independence from 1763 to 1783. And your thesis is ideas about American independence changed greatly from 1763 to 1783. That sucks. Like, that's not a thesis. That's just the prompt with a word added to it. So don't do that. Or they didn't change at all, right? Don't even, like, we want to have subtlety. Maybe it did in some regards, maybe it didn't in other regards. Maybe certain regions it changed a lot, other regions it changed a little. Remember the dance. Do your dance, right? Subtlety on the one hand, on the other hand, on the one hand, on the other hand. Okay, so you see that. Then I look at ideas. It's talking about ideas. It's not talking about like Lexington and Concord. It's not talking about like specific materialistic or material things. It's about ideas, the way people think, right? So I want to have that kind of element in my argument where I'm making an argument about like, well, ideas. And then, okay, again, the years did that already. So as I said in class, anytime I see a DBQ prompt, even though I teach this class and taught it for a while, my first inclination is like, I don't know. Like, I really don't know. And I see them and I'm like, ah. And then you take a second, take 30 seconds, right? Take some deep breaths and look at it and you go, okay, what are these years? And you're going to go like, okay, so what's that, 17? Okay, right. All right. This is like the revolution, right? You can get some clues, obviously, from the documents. And if you take a step back, you're going to be in better shape when you look at the prompt, because the issue is when you read a prompt, it like sucks you in, right? And you kind of get like a deer in the headlights trying to find like, what's the right answer? What's the right answer? What's the right answer? What's the right answer? There's no right answer. It's a prompt, right? It's like prompting you to like to do your dance. Go, come on, right? Give me a thesis. So like this is an important thing to remember, to like step back. What do I just know about these years? What's happening in this time period? Okay, now American independence, what do I know about that? Okay, you start thinking of some things, or maybe Thomas Paine, or like, okay, the Stamp Act Congress, and then ideas start coming to you, right? And then you go, oh, wait a minute, I know a lot about this time period. So let's go from there. So take that time to step back. Don't get sucked into the terms of the prompt itself. Make sure to step back and ask, like, what's happening? What do I know? What do I remember about this time period? And then you can the puzzle pieces will start to fall together and you can answer, right, better. So read the prompt. What do you do next? You read the docs and you plug in the evidence, right? So here's some docs from this DBQ. They're kind of tiny, but this is the House of Burgesses. So I go through and I read it carefully. Imposing taxes, inhabitants, House of Burgesses, what do I know about it? Plug in outside information. Okay, Virginia started as Jamestown in 1607. I might not use that information, but it's something that's like, it's keeping the fire going in my mind, right? So I might not use all of this stuff. Proclamation line of 1763, I might plug in there because this is 1769. So they're talking about, this, that, the other. First Amendment. I see some stuff about taxation in here, right? I know the House of Burgesses is like conservative. So there's any number of bang, 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 bang outside evidence. Next one, Samuel Adams, 1772, rights to the colonists. All men have the right to remain in a state of nature. So like there's some Enlightenment stuff happening here. I know that he's from New England. They're the most pro-revolution. This is before the Boston Massacre, a couple years before. I remember that, right? You put it in. You don't need to remember that level of detail. Radical New England, Enlightenment, right? Patriot, famous patriot, whatever. Outside information. Next, when you look at it, Quakers, you kind of read through, you're like, all right, Quakers are pacifists. This is 1775. John Dickinson was a Quaker. The guy who drafted the Articles of Confederation did not sign the Declaration of Independence. And then the last one is some loyalist document, right? This woman is mad about basically saying that the Patriots are kind of like, like a gang, right? Forcing her to do stuff. And that's my outside evidence, right? So, and then obviously there'd be 4 more documents you go through and plug it in, and see what you come up with. And as you start to read them, you'll start to go like, oh, this one is not like no revolution. So you just kind of come up like this one, no revolution. These are people who don't like the revolution. I remember the prompt is about ideas. So like, what's the idea? Do you like the revolution? Do you not like it? So I see a pattern here already, like, oh, the Southern loyalist doesn't want revolution because she's a loyalist, right? She's actually from Scotland. And then these Quakers don't want revolution because they're pacifists. Okay, so they both want revolution. I'm definitely thinking I'm going to have a paragraph about people who don't want revolution. But the reason they don't want revolution is different reasoning. So when you put documents in a group, obviously you're thinking same, same, same. What's the same with these documents? But also keep in mind what's different, because that's going to give you that nuance point that, like, in a topic sentence would be like, across the colonies, there were many voices that did not support the revolutionary cause. However, reasons for their resistance varied greatly, something like that, right? So now I've kind of like hinted, right, at a bit of nuance, and I could introduce these documents, right, very easily. This one is enlightenment. I'm not going to show you all 4 documents, but there are other enlightenment documents. So like I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have a paragraph like, oh, some people were informed by the high-minded ideals of the Enlightenment, right? Blah, blah, blah. And then this one, when you first read it, you might not know where to put it. That's fine. If you're looking at documents and you don't have a category yet, that's fine. And just try to get one. And always remember, try to have 3. If you have 2, one of them is probably too big, and you're going to make a kind of baggy or sloppy argument because there's just going to be too many docs in that paragraph. Okay, so now I've read the prompt, I've historicized, I've done all that, I've plugged in the outside information. And now, again, to think about groups. What is a group, right? You look at these kind of figures here and you see different things. Some are different colors, right? Some have boxes, don't have boxes. You got uppercase, lowercase. There's no right or wrong way to categorize these like abstract ideas here. Similarly, as we saw in classes last week, you can group your groups any way you want, right? Almost, right? Or rather, maybe a better thing to say is there's no one right way, right? There's probably about a half a dozen ways in different permutations. So that should make you feel more confident, right? That again, if you're reading the prompt, historicizing, looking at the documents, plugging outside information, grouping them, with each step, you should feel more and more and more emboldened to be like, I see a pattern here, right? I know where outside evidence can go. I see that like you're going to make an argument. You're going to respond to the prompt, right? So similarly with these things, like you look for patterns, right? What is this? We don't need this slide. This slide is nonsense. Topic sentences. So like here, like, although these figures include both numbers and letters, the elements that connect them is that they're all red, right? So that even that dumb sentence, right, has nuance, right? I've acknowledged a kind of counter argument, right? That there are numbers, they're different, but they're also the same. These figures stand out for the fact that they are not contained in boxes, right? Fine. All of the figures are aligned roughly from lower left to upper right, blah, blah, blah. These are more closely aligned. So, right, when you go back and look at this, you see that, like, fine, any one of these arguments is fine, right? And that's an abstraction of what you're doing. But similarly, on any DBQ, you're going to go through and you're going to find the patterns that you think make sense. But you really have to think. You have to be engaged. You have to be intellectually curious when you go through this. You can't just like fake it. If you're faking it or like, what's the right answer? Like that's going to be a bad DBQ. So just like, fake it till you make it. All right. So now you've looked at the prompt, you historicized, you've read the documents, you plugged in outside information, you've come up with topic sentences, you put the docs in order, all that stuff. Now you're ready to, come up with what's the thesis, 2-on-1 thesis. Remember what a 2-on-1 is. It's 4 sentences, and then the first 2 sentences are basically intro to your thesis, context for your thesis, and then the last 2 sentences are the thesis, right? So first sentence is the question, how much context do you need? It's not since the beginning of time, right? You can potentially use the periodization of the prompt, right? So like if we go back to our example here, I could very easily say, right, if I wanted to be real slick with it, I could say from the end of the French and Indian War to American independence at the Treaty of Paris in 1783, right? The colonists clearly went through a dramatic revolution in the way that they blah blah blah. We're thinking that's a fine first sentence that introduces my thesis. Now you'll notice if I have a sentence that like from the French and Indian War to the Treaty of Paris, ideas about independence in the colonies evolved dramatically. That's like sounds like a thesis, like a 1-sentence thesis. Like I'm almost there. But because that first sentence is so specific, right? That it's going to force you to make your thesis even more specific. So again, that's why when you have a first sentence that since the beginning of time, you're only going to go so far in 4 sentences, right, to the last one. But if you have a first sentence that really hems you in to the periodization you've been given, it's really going to force you to have a pretty nuanced argument. And why not, right? The first sentence is a general statement about the prompt, about the period, and then you're going to make a very specific argument that's rooted in the documents, right? So that's easy to do in 4 sentences. Second sentence, more detail, relevant to your argument. Think of the second sentence as supporting the first sentence, right? Helping to back up any claims you may have made, right? So like in my example I just gave about the dramatic change, I could say something along the lines, I'm just making this up as I go too, right? So like just for authenticity's sake. The second sentence could be something like, given that I've looked at the documents, given where I know I want to go, right, with the thesis, something along the lines of, independence was not preordained, and it in the wake of the French and Indian War, most colonists wanted to be more British and have more representation in Parliament, while there still was a small minority of colonists who uh, did want revolution, something like that, right? So that's like in support. And again, like more and more detail, more and more detail. Sentence 3 is the transition sentence, right? Where you're going to introduce maybe some nuance, 3 or 4. While X, also Y. Well, the stuff I just said is true. There's something that's even more true and more important. Something like that, right? Something that's going to introduce nuance and also introduce potentially the 3-part structure of your argument, right? So for my example here, again, making it up as I go. Ideas about revolution varied greatly from region to region, and ideas about revolution varied greatly from one region to another, comma. They were informed by both nationalist sentiment and Enlightenment philosophy, comma. However, not all colonists were in, say, even as late as the 1780s, not all colonists were on board. Okay, period. That's to introduce some nuance, and I've given you like a little flavor of that's probably going to be my 3-part structure, right? For my, if I was going to do the 3 body paragraphs. And then the last sentence is the like bang, right? The thesis. So in mine, ideas about revolution evolved in direct relationship to the changing circumstances in the colonies in the wake of the French and Indian War, comma. And by the Treaty of Paris, the colonies, or during the Revolution itself, some were informed by Enlightenment thought. I mean, I kind of did this already, so I don't really like where I'm going with it, but like Enlightenment thought, and others by nationalism, yet still others, blah, blah, blah. So now I basically have a third and a fourth sentence that are very, very similar. I'm just going to go and start writing and leave it like that, and then come back to it and like see if I can tweak it. Because hopefully in the course of writing, I'll go like, okay, I can, or maybe just make it 3 sentences, right? If the clock is ticking, right, then just make it 3 sentences then, right? That's fine. If you're happy with it 3, make it 3. There's no rule that it has to be 4. It's just a good structure for introducing context and then narrowing down to your argument. So here, some examples here that I have, right? Proclamation line, that's 1763. Treaty of Paris is 83. Right, so here's some examples. I forgot I even had this, right? From being restricted by the proclamation line, but fighting for independence, something, 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 right? Some people were for, some people were against, differing opinion. I could also potentially make an argument about region. Well, New England was deeply influenced by Enlightenment thought and revolutionary zeal. The Southeast was, with its Anglican majority and traditional values, it was more, aligned with the Loyalists, something. Again, while X, also Y, this, however, that, some did, others didn't. Remember, do your dance. Do your dance. Do your dance. That's the nuance point. That's the complexity point. There's no thing where the last paragraph is complexity. That's not how it works. Complexity is just good writing. You do it throughout the thing. And if you remember, do your dance, do your dance, do your dance. If you remember that, you're going to write with complexity. You're going to write with nuance. It's not just everyone did it or the revolution was popular. That's not an argument. That's not good. So don't do that. Here's some examples from a different prompt. And these are real student examples from previous years. So here the reform movements in the United States sought to expand democratic ideals, assess the validity of this statement with specific reference to the years 1825 to 50. Prior to the presidency of Andrew Jackson, ooh, hello, right? Here's an introduction. Here's got some context, right? Some nice context. There were limited rights and opportunities for those who were not white landowning citizens. That's just a true statement, right? It's taking the years and it's giving an introductory sentence that works. However, ooh, nuance. This time was an age of nationalism and pride, marked by the determination of repairing the nation, though suffering from the formation of different political parties and sectionalist tension. I said this is unedited, right? So I kind of don't know what you're talking about here a little bit, but I get that there's another hand, on the other hand, we have nationalism, pride, as opposed to this history of exclusion, right, that you outlined in the first sentence. Reformists and abolitionists, right? So reform movements, it doesn't say anything about abolitionists, but now we've introduced one of the reform movements that we're talking about in probably one of the paragraphs. During this time, sought to make the United States a more ideally democratic nation. That's a good thesis, but that's not all. There's one more sentence here. The United States became a more democratic nation following the Second Great Awakening, a shift in culture regarding education and women's rights, and the temperance and communal movements. Okay, this is the three-part structure I'm going to have here, right? The United States becomes a more democratic nation following these three things. That's great. That's a banging thesis, right? Here's another one. Presidency of Andrew Jackson embodied the idea of the common man in government as he claimed to be the representative of the common people's interests. Again, almost cookie cutter, right? Kind of first introductory sentence, takes the periodization and uses it as context. Campaigns became more directed towards the common people, and suffrage expanded to all white males. True fact. The increased involvement of the common people in politics influenced how various social reforms expanded democratic ideals. Ooh, okay, so we're building. Some social reforms encouraged the expansion of equality. Some supported the democratic ideals of economic and political mobility, and other reforms restricted democratic freedoms. Great. But let's see what excellent looks like, because when I read this last sentence, some social reforms encouraged the expansion of equality, some supported the democratic ideals of economic and political mobility, and other reforms restricted democratic freedoms. I kind of want that's kind of a setup, right? I want one more thing, say one more thing to tie it all together. So this is the excellent kind of thesis here. In the period 1825 to 1850, the same time that Jacksonian democracy was spreading across the United States. So again, great introduction here. Use the periodization as your context. A religious revival movement known as the Second Great Awakening was affecting Americans on a moral and societal level. Okay, already have a little bit of complexity here. Everyday Americans were involved not only in politics, but also in social causes. Many of these reform movements were aimed at fixing societal ills or troubles, such as the temperance movement, the push for public education, and the women's rights movement. This is not the last sentence, right? So in the last one here, I want one more thing, right? One more. Here we have it, the satisfying last sentence. Reform movements from 25 to 50 generally aim to either improve society by fixing its issues or to give the underrepresented a voice, ultimately leading to expansion of democratic ideals, with most Americans having both the right to use their voices or to work on getting other oppressed groups their own. Oh, man, right? So I use this example to kind of show you this is a good 2-1-1, right? The two introductory sentences take the context, take the periodization, and give us a little intro, give us some context, start to transition. The third sentence introduces a three-part structure to the argument, but then the fourth sentence, bang! The fourth sentence makes an argument. That's why this last one is a little bit like, you're left wanting something more, right? This one, better, right? Getting at that argument, right? So here's a number of examples you can look at, but just as a general rule, again, you want to try to think, if you want to like a hard and fast rule, first sentence, use the periodization for your intro and context. From the period X to Y given in the prompt. Things happened, right? In general, what do you know about that time period? Or if you can flip the years to do something like this, the Jacksonian period or whatever, then do that. That's even better, right? If you can identify the years as meaning something. First sentence. Second sentence, introduce some kind of like nuance, right? Well, the first sentence stuff was happening, other stuff was happening that's relevant to the thesis, right? Then third sentence, bang, 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 outline your three-part structure, basically what the paragraphs are. And then the fourth sentence, pow. Fourth sentence is that sentence that you really need to tie it all together. Now, you got to like use your like imaginary brain to come up with that sentence, but in reading the documents carefully, in plugging in outside information, in grouping them, in putting them in the right order, in writing topic sentences for the paragraphs, like, my man, like you're there. You did it all. Every step of the process that you've gone through is you coming up with the thesis. You put document 1 and document 3 together for a reason. What is it? Right? You're going to argue about this document first, this document second, and this document third for a reason. What is it? That's your thesis. You know it. In ordering, going through the process of making that architecture, making that blueprint, you've made the thesis. You just got to like get it from up here to like down on the thing. All right. Now, what the heck's a context paragraph? Didn't you provide context in your blah blah blah, in your thesis? No. Context paragraph is like, wait, can I focus this thing? Or this just says light, it doesn't focus. Your 2-1-1 starts with a little triangle down to your thesis. Your context paragraph then back it up, right, to the bigger context. Very short, 3 to 4 sentences, right? And the first and last sentence can be super formulaic if you want it, like my examples here, in order to understand the ways in which the American Revolution was about the stuff I said it was. One should look back, or one should look one of two things, right? You can either look back. One should look back to the, right, salutary neglect, like go back in time and then give us the context moving forward. Or one should look like at the larger movement for, political representation, rights, and blah, blah, blah happening globally in the late 18th century, right? Something like that. Or, right, the thing I just said should be seen in the larger context of whatever, right? So first sentence here, very formulaic. And then it's just a place to dump some of the evidence that you used when reading your documents that you're not going to use in the paragraphs, right? So like you dumped a bunch of stuff. So like here, looking at my example, if I went back to the example I had here, I'm not going to talk about Jamestown in this argument. I'm not going back to Jamestown, but maybe I will use like Jamestown here and like some loyalists talk about like, or maybe talk about the Anglican Church and conservatism, or like the evolution of the colonies, something like that. I've got all that evidence there already. So just dump some of it in the context paragraph. And that's kind of, to use another visual, right? Here's another way to think about it. Your 2-1-1 is the little, right? And then there's, again, the meme, right? Record scratch, freeze frame. I bet you're wondering how I got here. And then you rewind out. And that's the second part of, right, that's your context paragraph. And again, you rewind it back a little bit, and give us a story, or go out and give us a story. So like if you had a question about civil rights, right, a prompt about civil rights, you could, in the period 1955 to 65, you could go like, oh, let's talk about the Jim Crow era, right, the anti-black violence and the Great Migration, right? And that, in order to understand the thesis, one needs to look back at the anti-black violence, blah, blah, blah. That's my context paragraph. Clearly, we can see how, blah, 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 blah. Or expand out, right? In order to understand the demands for justice being made by African Americans, one should also look at the period as one of general societal transformation. And you could talk about, right, gay rights, women's rights, right, the Chicano movement, whatever, right, in the same time period. The Great Society programs, whatever. Here's another way to look at it, right, that your argument is tight focus. So this is the people tearing down the statue of Saddam Hussein in Iraq after the Iraq War. And then you look at the big picture. This is it's a different picture, right? It tells a different story. It gives us a larger, like, oh, hey, wait a minute. I can understand this picture on the left and make an argument about this picture on the left a lot better now that I know, like, oh, like this is what it actually looked like, right? It's kind of like a staged thing, right? So you can think of it like this, you can think of it like that, you can think of it like this. Again, first sentence, in order to understand the blank, 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 the argument I just made, we should look at whatever. And salutary neglect, in this example that I use, the Revolutionary one, Navigation Acts, tax by Native Americans, whatever. And then again, if you want to be really formulaic with it, your last sentence can be something like, right, considering, like all, considering these factors, it's clear how my thesis is right, right? So that you're constantly reminding the reader of your thesis, and you've taken them from introduction, thesis, context, thesis. Now they're going to get a topic sentence again. So there's a kind of a rhetorical move that you're doing here in constantly reminding the reader thesis, 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 but also backing up context. Context, that's nuance. That's my other dance, right? That's the other dance. So all of that stuff is important. Now, if you've gone through and done the blueprint the way I ask you to, you've already got your first topic sentence. You've got the order of the docs. You're ready to go, right? You know what outside evidence you're going to use, right? And where. And then when you get into the thing, the actual writing, again, think DACA, DACA, DACA. Describe, analyze, cite, argue. Describe, analyze, cite, argue. When you see a document like, where's it at? Like one of these, don't say, right, in document 5. Come on, please. You don't need to know anything. You don't need to know anything at all about the revolution to say, in a, let's see, what is a journal entry? In a journal entry from 1775, Scotswoman Janet Shaw reflected blank, right? They gave you all of that information. Here's the Quaker leaders. In an address to the Colonial Assembly in 1775, leaders of the Quaker, blah, blah, they gave you that information. So that is the first D of DACA, is describe the thing, right? Who made it? What is it? When was it made? Give me a year, give me an author, tell me what the thing is. Is it an address? Is it a letter? Is it a journal entry? Is it a newspaper article? Is it an op-ed? Whatever. And then you analyze. Just describe it like I can't see it, right? Like I can't see it. So again, to go back to one of these examples here, right? This, right? A teapot created in England between 1766 and 1770, inscribed with no Stamp Act, shows on the one side of the pot a declaration of no Stamp Act, where on the other side of the highly decorated pot, we have a phrase, America, liberty restored, right? That's just like, if I couldn't see the thing, I can now visualize, right, what it looks like. Right, so that is the you've done the D, the description. That is the A of the analyze, and then you cite it. Right? What is it? Where do you find it? Doc 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Whatever it is. Don't forget to cite. It's very, very important. Don't forget to cite. Cite, cite, cite. Put a post-it note up on your computer. Cite, cite, cite. Period. So you can do that in 2 sentences. You can do that in 1 sentence. Most of the time, it's actually 1 sentence, right? So you're moving quickly. Then you do your argument. Now it's time to do your dance, right? Are you going to give context, right? Like back to here again, right? This pot needs to be understood in the, as directly reflecting the Stamp Act, which was passed, right? So like, there you go. What did it do? Which was repealed 1 year after its proposition, right? So like that's context, or I could argue, right? Interestingly, this pot is made in England and presumably would have been sold in England as well, which clearly shows that the audience for anti-tax sentiment was not just the colonies, but also England itself, right? Or whatever, right? Introduce, if you want to do outside evidence, you can introduce outside evidence here. The most prominent example of the anti-Stamp Act feeling was the Stamp Act Congress, right, in which blah, blah, blah. The colonists came together and had pass these resolutions to blah, 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 right, whatever you can think of. So that is DACA, D-A-C-A. And again, it's formulaic because it should be quick writing. You shouldn't have to do much thinking here. Right? You got like, okay, what is it? It tells me what is it? What like literally, what does it do? What does it say? Citation. None of that takes any brain power at all. Then bang, argument. Your argument. You doing happy. You introducing outside evidence. You. And that again, from a kind of rhetorical or literary, I suppose, perspective, it gets the reader into that like rhythm. Into the rhythm where when they see that in a year author citation, they know, bang, argument. And they see it again, bang, argument. That's kind of what you want. You want to like get your rhythm going, right? So that the reader's reading and they see, okay, now you're going to do your thing again. Good, great. Now you're going to do your thing again. Good, great. That it really, right, it hits right when you write it like that. Okay, here's an example of mine from, again, a different context. This is, right, Harper's Weekly, racist cartoon. It's in our book. It's also kind of famous image in a 1874 cartoon featured on the cover of Harper's Weekly. Didn't take any brain power to do that. Now, what is it? Takes very little brain power to do this. The illustrator depicts Black Americans sowing chaos in Congress while Lady Liberty and white politicians cannot restore order. That's just a fact, right? So like if you couldn't see it and I was describing it to you, you kind of go like, okay, I get a sense of what it is. Citation, right? What is it? Don't forget to cite, 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 cite. Now I do my analysis, I do my happy, I do my whatever. Clearly expresses a common racist trope of the period after the 13th to 15th Amendment. So I got outside evidence here. Been passed, black voters would vote in uneducated black politicians, thus ruining democracy, right? A common racist trope. So this is like basically perspective, point of view, audience. If I wanted to be really explicit, right, this cartoon clearly expresses, it's clearly written to an audience that would have welcomed racist tropes of that period, right? Or this cartoon is clearly illustrated from the perspective of a illustrator who thinks, right, this, that, the other. And then you transition, right? Do your happy, do your outside evidence, and then, again, very formulaic. This was a common opinion during Reconstruction in another document that's similar, right? Just transition sentence. If I want to have a little nuance here, well, many white Americans would have agreed with this opinion. Black Americans, transition, new document, right? In a letter written in 1875 by Frederick Douglass, we see how Douglass argues something different, right? So again, it's not hard. It's not hard. You just got to go through the steps, and these are the steps, right? Read the prompt. What are the years? Historicize. Read the documents carefully one time, not hurried in a cursory way several times. Plug in outside information. Think big, right? As big or as little, specific or as ambiguous. Plug in, plug in, plug in. Um, uh, Order the things together, right? Order the docs, group the docs, topic sentences, then you're rolling. 2-1-1, context, topic sentence already written, bang, 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 documents, bang, bang, documents, and you're done. That is how you do it. So you can do it my way, you can do it your way, but one way or another, I want you to practice this for the next time we meet, and then we will talk about your feelings, how it went. Time yourself, right? Give yourself the 60 minutes, pretty much 60 minutes, but a little bit of time extra might be okay. If you're going to spend a couple extra minutes doing it, spend it in the planning stage, not in the frantically finishing stage. That latter stage is not going to get you the points. The former is going to get you the points. Careful, right? Measure twice, cut once, be careful. Have a nice blueprint, and you won't end up like these fools. All right.